Hello, hello. Can everyone hear me? Good. All right. There I am. Okay. Aaron Burnett. I am the founder and CEO of Mach 33 Financial Group. A little bit about myself. I currently have a cold, so you may hear the congestion. That's one thing. The other thing is you may be wondering why I'm wearing flannel and a kind of VC vest, and that's because I grew up in upstate New York, where on dairy farms. I have a scar still from when I fell on a hay hook as a kid, hang it. So, I do feel a little bit at home in the space ag conversation, and a little bit at home in North Dakota, minus the bitter cold that I no longer can handle. But Mach 33 is a financial group that we started. Here, let me see if I got I need to turn this on. Nope. Technical difficulties here. Give me a sec. Who knows how to run the clicker? Oh, I don't think I want that. Let's try that. Is that working? I was pushing the wrong button. I had it upside down. All right. So Mach 33 is a space-focused financial group. What we do is we've realized about 5 years ago when we started this that space is a very specific type of business. It's technically a place, not an industry. And what we saw was there was a lot of focus on very specific financial products like a venture fund or some kind of specific financial product that was doing one thing. Focused on the industry. And what that ended up creating was a lot of hammer and nail situations. If you're a venture fund, everything needs to fit a very specific modality. Every company needs to look exactly like a venture model, and it creates a lot of problems and failure long term. So what we realized was we were going to need to create a company that had pretty much all the tools in the financial tool belt, geared and targeted specifically for the industry. Allows us to underwrite things better, allows us to understand risk better, allows us to return capital better to investors, which makes them happy, which gives more money into the industry. Ultimately, we're trying to accelerate human expansion into space. So that's us and what we're doing. So the conversation today is talking about when you're investing in space, how do you think about it? And this is a 15-minute conversation, so this is not going to be deep enough. I can go offline with some of you guys if you're interested, but these are the high-level points. First, can I see a show of hands who watched or knows what I'm talking about when I'm talking about October 13th? All right, that's the majority, it looks like. If you haven't seen this and don't know what this is, you should be paying attention to it. And on October 13th, which was a Sunday, SpaceX launched the world's largest rocket, most powerful rocket ever built, and they caught it with what effectively are chopsticks. Now, that if you see there on the right side, that big tower-looking thing is 200 feet tall. So it looks kind of small there, but I've been here in person. That thing is absolutely massive. It's on a sandbar. It goes in the middle of nowhere, and that's a very tall rocket that it's catching, very big. It's got 33 engines on it. So the reason it was so important is not just because it was the largest, but this basically allows SpaceX to take SpaceX or anyone that's using SpaceX to get to space a lot cheaper. There's a lot more to it than this, but this is a big point. It's effectively moving from, using a car once when it runs out of gas and throwing it away to, refueling it and reusability. This is the fundamental concept, and this is a huge deal in what happened October 13th. If you haven't seen it, you should go watch it. And the reason this is important is because what I mentioned before, space is a place. This sounds like a dumb little rhyme, but it really is an important concept for investors, and we have to kind of harp on it. We tend to think of it as an industry. We tend to think of ag might be an industry. It has certain players and things like that. But functionally, space is a place. It's a place where industry can function. And what that means is you have a lot of different potential market opportunities. You have a lot of different things happening, players, governments, all sorts of things. Technologies are basically limitless. With that being said, it being a place, now all of a sudden you can go there and you don't have to spend millions of dollars potentially to put your satellite into space. So just following that trend, this is, if you've done anything in space, you've seen this before. This is old news. If you haven't, functionally speaking, it's gotten a lot cheaper. A couple of numbers I just put in there to kind of help kind of contextualize this. If you wanted to put 1,000 satellites into space, it would have been $27 billion with NASA, $6 billion with ULA's old Delta IV. I don't think Delta IV Heavy is flying anymore, but someone might need to fact check me there. SpaceX Falcon 9 was a huge step, an order of magnitude cheaper, but even so, it's still $550 million. SpaceX's Starship, being fully reusable, makes that more like $55 million. All of a sudden, someone could put up a $55 million satellite constellation with global, ubiquitous telecom coverage, whatever it is that their constellation is doing. To put that into context, I looked at, how much money does Google have? How much money does Apple have? How much money does Berkshire Hathaway have, for example? Big companies with money on their balance sheets, they could put 1.8 million satellites in space. If you're Google, just with the money on your balance sheet, you could put 1.8 million satellites into space, in theory, tomorrow. This is kind of world-changing. This is why we're seeing what's happening with SpaceX today, where they put up 6,000 satellites with the Starlink constellation, and that is driving billions and billions of revenue, and we forecast that to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $100 to $120 billion in revenue just from Starlink by 2030. So if you're going to use, SpaceX is a good one to think through. When you're thinking about investment, it's an easy one to put into your head, so I'm going to continue to use that as the example. But one of our core theses is that we are not currently in the true application phase of space. If you want to use a parallel to help think through this, the internet industry started way before the bubble of the 2000s. It started when people were building microprocessors and pulling fiber for landlines and for fiber optic cables and Cisco networking equipment. That's probably where we're at. We are not at the application phase just yet. What SpaceX has done that's kind of brilliant is mix their concept together, but they've taken what's effectively an infrastructure layer in transportation. They've combined that with the infrastructure layer of telecoms, communications, putting cell phone towers in space effectively, and then they've grabbed a global home internet market, right? So they kind of vertically integrated all the way down the value chain, and they own all the costs and all the timelines associated with that. So if you're looking at SpaceX as an example, the infrastructure was everything. They spent 20 years building the infrastructure. It started in 2001 or 2 now, I can't remember. Elon put his first $100 million into it, and that's the reason it exists today. But they really were focused on the infrastructure. So generally speaking, with space being a place and with the infrastructure still being early, we think, how do you invest in the infrastructure? And we think that's really important when you're building these things out. So there you go, invest in infrastructure. That's kind of our thesis. I think one of the core things when we're talking about investing that's really important to us is understanding the time component. I think a lot of founders may not appreciate this. I think some investors appreciate it too much, but functionally time is the equalizing variable in investing. You're always chasing an IRR. If you could put money here today that makes more percentage than over here, then you go for the one that makes the higher percentage now. You can always move it over somewhere else later. So you're always constantly trying to find that balance. So this is an overly simplistic chart. If there's any finance majors, you'll hate this because it's not perfect, but it's more of a concept chart, right? If you want to go for IRR, you have to kind of give up total multiple at a high level, right? If you want to go for total multiple, meaning turning $1 to $10, that's a 10x multiple, then you probably have to go a little bit less in IRR. And I'll give you some examples to highlight that and brag a little bit in here. So what you'll see is we have SpaceX are most of the examples. The white boxes are actual scenarios. The black are more hypothetical to help with the mental model. But if you look at SpaceX, all the way to the right, if you had invested in 2012, 10 years after it started, but you invested in 2012, you would have had a 12-year time hold, and if you had exited in this most recent tender offer, you'd have 169x multiple. $1 turned $169. That's a great multiple. That IRR is still world-class. Most investment hedge funds and things like that can't achieve a 53% IRR. However, if you then compare that to another exit that we have done for one of our clients, we held a stock relatively short, and we were able to return a 280% IRR. So all things being considered, if you could continually put that money back into work and keep getting, you'd choose 280% over 53% if you could do that over and over and over again, right? So this is kind of the paradigm of how you have to make investment decisions. And the reason that matters in space is pretty much everything, especially with infrastructure, takes a lot longer. It takes a year to build, maybe 2 years to build the thing. You might get in a queue to launch. It might take 6 months to get in the queue. It may get delayed for another 6 months for reasons that are beyond your control, and you've gone for a full 3 years before you even have your thing in space to prove that it actually works. Right? That's a long time to wait just to see if your prototype's going. I think helpful to look at this hypothetical scenario. We got SpaceX here on the left side. If you were to have bought it, buy it today, sell it in 3 years at a 5x multiple, that's a 71% IRR. If you buy it today and hold it for 5 years, these are assumptions, of course, but if you hold it for 5 years but it's a 10x multiple, it actually is a 58% IRR, right? Those are two choices you could make, and you basically have to decide for yourself, if I'm going to invest and hold something for less time, hopefully I'm going to use that money for something. This is how investors think. This is how professional investors think. This is, even if they're not necessarily making this decision like fully thought out, they are effectively thinking this every single time. Why would I invest in your thing that could take 5 years or 10 years to come to fruition when I could invest in something much easier, much faster, gets me my money back faster? So that is, when you're talking as a founder, when you're talking about as an investor, you have to identify this and really understand where it is that you live, what's the pitch that you're doing, but then also as an investor, what is it that I'm trying to accomplish with my money? Am I trying to accomplish a quick IRR where my money's back in my pocket with as high a percentage as possible, or am I trying to invest multiples, maybe generational wealth, but I'm willing to sit on it for 10, 15, 20 years? And there really isn't a perfect answer or a right answer to this. So just to give some context for how Mach 33 thinks, again, I mentioned this at the beginning, but we have this concept of having the right tools in the financial tool belt to be able to solve not just the founders and the company problems, there's two sides of this, but also to solve solutions for the investors. There's risk paradigms, there's timeline returns, there's all this stuff. So if you look, and I won't go through all this, but this is more, giving you a sense of how we think as investors. If you look all the way to the top right there, our early stage equity fund, our what I call Inertia Fund 1, this is the type of thing that we hold for 10 years. So we know it's going to take some time. We look for companies that might have an exit opportunity within that 10-year timeline. We're focused on that. That means we're, in many cases, looking for good multiples. We might exit a little early and get a better IRR, but that's not the core focus of the fund. And that as you move up and move into bigger and bigger funds, you tend to move to the left on your timeline. You tend to do, maybe a 10-year fund turns into a 8-year fund kind of thing. And then you go all the way to the left side, and we have identified some products that we build out now that are designed for really quick turnaround to the investor, but they solve really specific problems for founders, like a contract credit fund. They might need some cash set against the contract that they have to solve some of their cash flow issues. That's great for an investor because it's relatively low risk. They get their money back maybe in as little as a year, but they're getting a lot less return on that, right? They're really chasing the IRR, not the total multiple. So anyway, when we think about investing in space, when we think about how we want to invest in space, when we think about what should I do with my limited amount of money that's in my pocket today, we think about all of these things. And if you're thinking about investing in space, I'm not sure how many are in the room thinking about investing in space, But you probably should be thinking about this, and you probably should be taking into account what's the right vehicle to achieve my financial goals. And if you're a founder or someone who's looking to raise from someone like myself, you need to be thinking about this as well. And where do I fit? If you're pitching this equity, this is where a lot of founders have gotten into trouble over the years. Everything was this kind of early stage equity. Everything was that I promise this is going to be $1 billion fund. I promise it's going to return you 100x or 1,000x, whatever you invest in me. And sometimes that's not the case. There are people that have these other options for you. So as you're doing this, as you're thinking through this, just think about where you fit in this paradigm. And yeah, hopefully that's helpful. If you have any questions, we have a research team. Check it out at 33FG Research.